I wanted to take a minute as we get kicked off to thank the group that got together to help put together the draft. Spent some time last week and this weekend working on it, so I appreciate everyone's efforts there. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for putting together. Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Barbara, for reviewing the edits and doing those things. I appreciate it. You know, we talked a few weeks ago when we kicked this off about the fact that we all sit in this room and we have conversations, but apparently when we get draft reports to talk about, we decide that maybe this room isn't the place to have the conversation and the other places are the place to have the conversation. We're all here. We're all adults. I think we can have a conversation at this table. We don't need to go out and do it without conversing with each other. So, you know, I appreciate everybody's efforts today to go through a lot of information in a short period of time. I know Holly does as well. But personally, I don't appreciate those types of dialogue happening outside the room that I'm not engaging in, and I haven't seen anybody else in the community engaging either. So, just not appreciated. Just not appreciated. I felt I needed to say that, especially when some of the discussion is just factually not accurate. So everybody has in front of them a draft of the fiscal year 2021 Spending Affordability Committee report. I appreciate the comments that we've received so far. If you have specific grammar comments or things like that, if you could email those to myself and Holly, that would be appreciated. We can get those put into the report. I don't think we need to talk about where commas go and what words we should use in this particular forum. We spent enough time doing that on Saturday. But this discussion is more about kind of the theme and overall overview of the report. So I'll just take a minute. I hope everybody had a chance to review it. I know I sent it late yesterday, but it's been about 24 hours or so, maybe not quite that long. Had a chance to review it. The theme within this report, I think, lines up with what everybody voted on within the dialogue that we had as a committee around making sure that we're paying attention as a county to expenditure growth and keeping that in line with revenue projections. That we do have challenges out there related to on the growth side, you know, potential economic recession in the next 12 to 18 months. You know, other things that are going on that have impacted that. So the need to maintain that expenditure growth within that level. Also the need to, you know, maintain our ratings, so therefore not borrow more than we should. So I think I was able to, or we as a team were able to capture everybody's comments around, you know, what we discussed on the CIP funding, on the operating budget, on the school system, and everything. So if anybody has any particular large issues that they want to bring up, this is the time to bring them up so we can discuss them as a committee. I think what we're going to do is take any comments and changes tonight. We'll take that back. We'll make any further edits, and then we'll have that conference call next week, and then I will ask everybody to email me their vote on the report. So that we can have that documented from the voting members of the committee. So with that, I'll open it up to any dialogue.
So one thing that, you know, I had mentioned earlier, and again, is it a likelihood that it would happen? Probably not. But I just, in looking at all the numbers, I just don't see how the county's going to be able to get to where we need to go on just this side of the equation without being able to control something on the school side.
Mm-hmm.
But politically, it's probably suicide for anybody to say, oh, we want to put in a bill to bring control back from the school board and put it in with the county. But I feel I got to bring it up because I think, you know, I don't see any other way around it in my own mind without full control of the budget. But obviously, you know, I wasn't here to talk about that, and so that's something for the body to discuss.
I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, the county council and executive vote on whatever the ultimate budget is. So I think they do have that all in purse string control there.
it can't happen unless the state does it. The
Well,
state-
right,
like,
and-
the state
and we-
mandates that it's like school.
And we did see, like, Jessica Belmar put in that bill to offer to change the transfer tax if the county council votes on it. And so that's what I'm thinking, is something that, the
But
state
a
could do, a local
legislative-
delegation bill that would say, now, again, that's,
And what would you propose as safety?
well, I believe, and again, I don't have the resources to be able to just make the phone calls for this, but in the limited phone calls that I did to the State Board of Education, it sounds like Baltimore County might have some type of control over the school budget. And so I wasn't able to find out much more than that. But that's what I was thinking, that it would be something that would become either the county executive as part of the budget process, or the county council. And again, I don't know what system they have in place. But I just think having that control for the county would be a good thing. And then they can do a lot of the things that we recommended as far as strategic planning. That if, well, they need a building over here and you need something over here, well, then you can start to take that in account as a whole, instead of trying to, okay, well, they're doing their own thing and it's pretty much wagging the dog.
I 100% agree with the policy, 100%. Like, I think it's absolutely absurd that we have an expert school superintendent who then reports to a board of non-experts who then write 60% of the budget and give it to them. Like, I think it's ridiculous. I don't know how kids benefit from this system. It's antiquated. It probably harkens back to when, there was boards of animal control and stuff like that. But the problem is, like, within our own committee, we have members of the school board on this committee
Sure.
who aren't here tonight.
Right.
And I don't know how we can politically,
And that's what I mean,
include that.
I'm sharing with the group for your thoughts, but, that's kind of where I was.
It just seems like maybe that would be something that next year, because we kind of close down, kind of the essential pieces this
Yeah,
year.
I mean, however you guys want to do it. I just thought. it
Or
was-
even if the council ends up approving that we meet on an ongoing basis, maybe there's a conversation that we have at another time.
absolutely.
I have some comments. I sent out an email with that addresses individual comments for my page. I'll just discuss largely what my impression was, and I think throughout I've been suggesting that the report and the committee stay away from this prevailing argument or prevailing thought that residential development pays for itself. And I see at least 14.
Pretty sure it's not in here.
That was not mentioned in the.
So I think we're not. You can say verbatim, or you can imply it, and it's implied that
I
in
think
at
it's
least
implied because that's how you read it.
Um,
It's not implied or said.
Okay, so this is my impression, right? And
I read it on Facebook and I read it when you emailed it to me. That's your impression.
okay, so can I continue, or?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So there are at least 14 statements that I think are not accurate, and that ignore the county's history, the county's regulatory history with respect to growth mitigation, that are contradicted by statements in here. So when we talk about the impact of APFO and reducing revenue, or the impact of APFO reducing, the impact that APFO has, it ignores 20 years of regulatory environment that was largely unmitigated, that when you see that the problems that county started facing, which is in 2015 or so, was during that regulatory environment. It defies what has happened since then to say that, to imply, whether you were saying it expressly or whether you're implying it, to say that the growth mitigation will have an adverse impact. I think that,
So will less development bring in less revenue?
It will.
Just as, okay.
Yeah.
Is that what that statement says?
it also does not, but it doesn't say that it will reduce expenditure the same way.
But it says that it will reduce revenue. It's just a statement that says it will reduce revenue, right? It's an accurate statement. You said it was an inaccurate statement.
It's half of the statement.
But it's an accurate statement, correct?
I don't think it's productive for us to.
I'm not
to do
being,
this.
I'm not trying to be.
I think, I don't, we should not be.
It was an inaccurate
yeah,
statement.
I don't want to be
My question to
argumentative
you
here,
is, it
but I
says
think,
APFO will have an impact on revenue. Is that an accurate statement?
I think
Ignore
that,
the expenditure side for a minute. Is APFO having an impact on revenue an accurate statement?
I think it's an incomplete statement. And, in the report, if we intend for it to be comprehensive, then it would need to say that the revenue decline and the expenditure decline it will have an expenditure decline as well. It will reduce cost.
It will reduce
It will
costs
reduce
greater
cost.
than, the costs that are shown here and increasing are based on the impact of APFO, but those costs are still increasing at a greater rate than revenue.
Can you explain that?
So we have a potential, obviously we can't have a non-balanced budget, we have a potential structural deficit over a period of time based on today's request, if we were to fund everything at 74 million, and if we continue to follow the expenditure growth needs of the county, it would be 300 million in a few years, with the impact of reduced expenditures from APFO. That's just current level expenditure. So revenue is going to go down. So yes, you could make the argument that revenue is going to be here and expenditures were going to be here, right? And that APFO reduced this, but also reduced this, but there's still an imbalance.
I think though, when you look at it, it's the marginal impact of each additional residential development, the marginal cost and marginal revenue. That's how you would look at it and say what's more.
Depends on the residential development, right?
So then
Each one would have a different marginal cost and a marginal impact.
exactly, marginal revenue and marginal cost.
Yeah.
So then
I
that
got
nuance is not there. And so to just say generically that, to just use that to reinforce the prevailing narrative is
No,
not accurate.
No, it's not.
And I think it
that's
is a
the problem.
prevailing
You think
narrative.
there's some prevailing narrative
There is
here
no
about
prevailing
development, and
narrative.
there's no prevailing narrative. You've been bringing that to the table every week of this committee.
Narrative aside, this report has to recommend levels of indebtedness for the county. That is the sum total of the report. If this report reflected everything that you wanted in it, how would you change the result of the report to the borrowing, the spending, and where the county goes? Because 2 weeks ago, you voted for that expenditure level, if I'm not mistaken, and that debt level, if I'm not mistaken. So on what basis did you make that vote? And if we included your critiques, how would that result in anything different than what's in this report?
I think when I voted also, I said those numbers are a given, that we have that there's an analysis that's performed, and it says this is going to be the revenue. We have literally no say in that. So what we did was, in fact, Steve confirmed, that's the number that we are given, we vote on it, that's fine. But it doesn't negate the fact that that a policy change will have an adverse impact. If you say that it will have an adverse impact on revenue, you have to also say the other half of the equation, because that would be incomplete. And if this is the part that you were describing, the revenue, the debt, those levels are completely separate from the.
It's the result of the report.
So
The black letter at the end of the report has to be our advice to the council about debt and spending levels.
So I suggest that the advice be complete, and I don't think right now it's complete.
Okay, so if you look at it from the perspective of kind of the revenue, even if, let's ignore the fact that we're gonna have reduced revenue, ignore that accurate statement that revenue is gonna be reduced, right? The issue we have right now is we have an expenditure problem. Ignore development. We have an expenditure problem if we didn't develop anything.
So why do we have an expenditure problem?
We had.
Look at the numbers.
We have,
Why do we have those numbers?
What do you mean, why do we have those numbers?
Why is the expenditure, why do
You think the expenditure problem is because of development?
No, that's,
You just said.
The
You said that we have an expenditure problem because
expenditure
of development and
problem-
the AFO is gonna reduce expenditure.
the expenditure problem is due to poor growth management. And ignoring that, if you've been selling your inventory at a loss for years, hoping to make it up in volume, but it turns out that every year you have to borrow to make up the difference in the revenue that you were expecting, which is what the county has been doing for the past 20 years, then this is what we have. But
You have a hypothesis that growth patterns over X period of time are what led to the spending problem. Having been on the committee for a long time, we would periodically vote to exceed, to spend more money because we thought, revenues would come in line, irrespective of development patterns. So yes, in migration and growth, population growth has an impact on services, but also we have habitually voted to increase spending above minimal levels.
who has, the county or?
This committee during,
Well, I mean, just to be clear, this committee is not a
Yeah,
policy
this committee,
committee.
yeah,
It's
so I'm
making
familiar.
recommendations.
or more importantly, the council.
Yeah,
And so you have a hypothesis that one factor is causing that. Other people might have a hypothesis that a vector of things, that we've grown per capita spending, we've grown, in addition to development, we've grown, even if we didn't have the development, we still would have grown spending above need. So all we're saying here is we have a fiscal problem, we have an imbalance. Based on current requests, that imbalance is getting worse. And slower development will slow the revenue side, making that imbalance even worse. Those are factually, in my opinion, accurate statements. What happened in the past, we have no power to change. What happens in the future is we suggest growing spending more slowly and taking into account slower revenue growth. Those are logic. I'm not sure what, we're not chartered to say that the last 20 years have been bad, even if we could get agreement on that. And it would be a meaningless statement for what the county should do going forward.
so
So what is your policy recommendation that you feel is lacking in the report?
you mentioned that I have a hypothesis about the residential development that led to what we have, and perhaps the county has voted to increase expenditure or revenue or expenditure over the years above the minimum needed. Except when I look at so there's this discussion about maintenance of effort. If you look at some of over the years, because the previous year's budget approval that goes through below the needed level impacts so the annual base is impacted every year, right? So the annual base, so the next year, the annual base determines the next year's maintenance of effort.
Yeah.
So every year, because the county has had to struggle to fund the school system, the next year's maintenance of effort gets impacted. So I would, at least as an example, look at what the county has gone through over the years in the school budget, where there has not been, where, the annual base has been impacted over the years to, for the next year's maintenance of effort. So that's, that's
So
why.
So you're saying that the school budget, school system has been, their budget has been squeezed? And
Yes.
because that they can't do, really?
Well, so if you're.
It's a taxpayer, 58 cents on the dollar.
Okay, so.
I'm sorry.
I
That's over
think,
50% of every tax dollar I pay.
I pay the taxes too, so, I think, what I'm saying is, just looking at, the number, the fact that the annual base that's used to calculate the following year's maintenance of effort is impacted every year. If this year class sizes go up or programs are cut, that would lead to the school system receiving a budget less than that's requested, then the following year's maintenance of effort calculation will be impacted. Is that accurate? And has that happened over the years?
But the same thing happens in the fact that every year the county has granted funds above maintenance of effort, meaning that the base has raised, so maintenance of effort will be a larger and keeps growing and keeps growing and keeps growing. Because the school system is obligated to present a budget that they believe will meet need, not that fits within the monies that are available from the county, because that's a mandate from the state, because they're a state agency. And it is the only budget that can be argued before the county council for increases by the county council over allocations by the county executive, but only if those budgeted amounts have been requested in a budget. So if they cut their request down to the level of available funds, they could not be eligible for any increase over what the county executive has done. But historically, the council has funded above maintenance of effort, and that's why we won't get much Kerwin money, because we have been funding our schools at a higher level than many other counties. And that means that as the base continues to rise, the percentage of maintenance of effort, because maintenance of effort is a per pupil cost. So what happens is whatever you spent this year, based on the enrollment increase that came in as of September 30th of this year, will be allocated as your maintenance of effort per pupil expenditure, excluding one-time costs. So if you raise the base, you raise the per pupil amount, which means your maintenance of effort the next year increases by the number of students that came in the last year. And there's no way to avoid that. It's going to go up. Unless enrollment goes down, your maintenance of effort expenditure will always be higher than the year before.
So how can the increase in class sizes be explained?
Increase in class size just means that you put more children into a school building and don't build
But
more
there's-
classrooms,
well,
or
per
don't
teacher.
hire,
Our-
or don't
per
buy more
teacher.
teachers, but
Yes,
hire
but
more teachers.
the bulk of our increase in class sizes are coming from Howard County residents
Resales.
who are resales, people who are new families that have moved into the county after a retiree has left their home.
And don't have children for 5 years.
Right, and then have children. So the bulk, what's?
67%.
67%.
So how accurate is that statement since,
That's from the
for the,
That's
since,
from the school system.
right, so the DPZ has calculated that since 2004, 17% of the county's new development is restricted, so 55 plus.
Because the only development we can get through because of her, there's
Because we're
political
closed
pressure
because
to
of-
try to close schools and to make sure that,
Which means close schools to develop.
right, because the idea is that there is less revenue being spent on the 55 plus empty nesters than there are on families that are coming in, that that are growing in the county.
And
Well,
still
the-
roughly 1/3 of people in the county have children in school, so
Can I-
2/3.
Well, let me be clear,
Let me
no,
just,
let me be clear
let me
with my
just
question.
provide one just counterpoint, and I want you to just ruminate on this. We sit between two cities. One city is not being developed, and its population is actually shrinking. One city is growing and has gone from 480,000 people 20, 30 years ago to close to 700,000 people now. Expected to reach 1 million people by 2050. Of those two cities, where would you want to raise a child?
I would want to raise.
And
I would-
why?
I would want to go to the,
Between Washington and Baltimore, which has a better outcome for a child born today?
you're talking about Baltimore City or
Baltimore
Washington?
City and Washington.
Or Washington?
Where would you have more confidence that your child will grow up?
He said Washington.
Exactly. And why? Because they are having revenue, they are
Jobs.
having increased tax base.
No,
That-
actually,
There's three ways that you can balance a budget in the city. Taxing, cutting spending, or growing the economy.
Most, actually, it's actually no secret that most people send their kids to private schools in Washington.
No.
If you have the
Not at all.
means,
Not at
if you
all.
have the
Not at
means,
all.
if you have,
No,
if you have the means.
My wife is an executive for Washington Board of Washington School System. It's categorically false.
Yes.
The vast majority, especially K through 8, go to public schools, whether it's charter or
So charter
regular,
schools, right.
or
But they are
whether
public
regular,
charter.
but they are public
Charter
schools.
schools, they're public.
Secondly-
What about the community that lives in that area in terms of the income and,
The apples to apples conversation here is a no growth community and a growth community. What provides better services for their citizens?
that's not, that, it's.
Point of
it's
order.
not-
Can we move this along? Because
We all know, we all have the comments you sent it to. I appreciate you sending them to the entire committee, so we can debate the schools for longer. Does anybody else have any other substantive comments that they want to make about the report? Any significant changes? Yes, sir.
The one thing I wanted to mention, first, thanks for drafting it. It looks like a lot of work into it, so I appreciate everybody doing that. It's small, but we talked about the annual fee reviews,
Yes.
which was definitely reflected the conversations we had, so I appreciate that. But at the tail end of the last meeting, I had mentioned the police special events fee.
Right, you did.
And we talked about maybe.
We should add that
calling
in that section.
We should
as
add
well.
that.
Yeah,
If
if
it
we
was a
could.
specific,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Thank you.
It wasn't lost, it just, it was part of that whole dialogue
Yeah.
around the fees and any other special exceptions.
Fair enough, thanks.
And also, as Steve just mentioned that, both at the meeting and after the meeting, if you find additional edits or stuff, just send it to Steve.
I can email that around too, if that would be.
Yeah, if you could just email me, I'd appreciate that.
Yep.
So we don't forget it. Thank you. Anybody else have any other comments that they wanted to make?
If not, I have a couple of additional comments.
Good.
Again, this is, in some parts of the report, the discussion is willing to offer or prognosticate the impact of a certain legislative action, whereas it will not in other parts. So, for example, on page 7, when it talks about the school surcharge fees, it says the committee notes, however, that it is unclear how much this will raise, the school surcharge fee, how much this will raise, since it has the potential to retard new development projects.
You
So,
probably should take that out.
Where are we at specifically on
We're
page
just
7?
saying 7, you have to tell us
That's
where.
good.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know where
Sorry.
we're at.
It's
yeah,
acknowledgement of county actions, the third bullet point down, last sentence. And it does contradict some of the other sentences going in the other parts of the report.
yeah.
Page 5.
Okay, but they said
Oh, so it's
7.
not page 7, it's page 5.
Well, yeah, so it depends on which, how you put it, but yeah, this page, acknowledgement of county
No,
actions.
And
Yeah, I got all 5 here.
this actually,
We'll just take it out then.
Yeah, we should
We'll
take out that last
we'll
sentence.
just remove that.
Okay, that's fine.
it goes to, and perhaps also adding the fact that, I think 4.5, I think for this year, the impact, the surcharge fee is $4.50, and that was not in there as well, so,
For fiscal year 20.
For
yeah.
20.
Oh,
It says
for,
it's 650 in fiscal year 2021.
so, okay, so for
Because
this,
this is 2021. This is what we're addressing in our
okay.
report.
All right. The other thing that I,
So hold on, so I
It's
apologize.
current and accurate then. It should.
Yeah, it should say-
Previous.
I think we can add that from previous 1.32 to 4 point something in 2020.
And then
We will add-
650
we
in
will add
2020.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll add
Got it.
that.
But we're not deleting that paragraph.
No,
So
we're
just
just
the
gonna
last
add
That
the
sentence.
2020.
That's not, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not, it's not enough, right?
Right.
Right, there's a point where it will help, but there will be a point where it has the potential to do that, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
an instance where this, I guess, prognostication is not offered is on page, so in other recommendations, I can find it maybe really quickly. Page 12 and 13.
I don't think so. I don't think 12 and 13.
It's 7, 8, and 9 are other recommendations.
Yeah.
What subsection is it?
What's the header on the dot?
The HCPSS
That's page 10.
budget and balance sheet.
Bottom of page 10, top of page
Yeah.
11.
Oh, so this must be a new. Okay, so this must be a different version.
No, it's the same one I
Well,
said.
everyone got a version at their place.
Okay. So it must be, yeah, okay, so bottom of page 10. So, I think, again,
Yeah, you're saying this is what we just talked about, the whole decline in funding. Your comment here is that no acknowledgement that the annual base and MOE has been impacted over the years due to decline in funding. That's an inaccurate statement.
well, also it's inaccurate to say that the level of service has changed, has declined.
We have,
No,
what,
your comment, and I'm reading your comment, and I've got your notes here, which you wrote, you said,
Yeah.
no acknowledgement that the annual base and MOE has been impacted over the years due to decline in funding.
Yeah, so there are other things that also, that this says, the other things, for example, is it doesn't discuss any potential impact of the redistricting actions on development.
This isn't about the,
This
this is
isn't
about
about
expenditure and revenue.
This is about,
On what?
This is about revenue and expenditure.
I,
Where in here where in those paragraphs does it say? This is all about the county the school system developing a balanced budget, making sure that the county's focused on not funding too much over MOE because of the impact it has on other services. There's nothing in this section about.
well, yeah, it could fit in, there
Does
are
anybody
other
on the committee feel
paragraphs.
that it's important to mention anything about development in this particular paragraph?
no.
It doesn't need to be in this paragraph, but there are others, there are other paragraphs where, perhaps one or two paragraphs where the school funding is discussed, and not school fund, just the budget revenue is discussed and the redistricting action would, could have an impact to open up regions of the county for development. And
But this isn't
This
about
isn't about-
development. This is about current revenues and expenditures. I don't understand why we keep talking about development.
I guess I'm seeing a lot of statements relating to development in the report, so maybe,
I think you're reading a lot of statements into them that say a lot about development, but I felt this was a pretty non-development based report. I mean, it says there's a comment about the general plan. I think we incorporated your comments from the last time about the fact that the county needs to look at commercial development as a potential to increase revenues, but other than that, I don't know there's a significant amount of stuff in here about development.
there are at least three maybe statements related to Apple in this report.
Yeah, but
And-
AFO isn't about development, it's just about the potential impact of revenue. That's all it says.
Well, so it's related, right? It's growth mitigation, and so if the concern is that APFO will reduce revenue, then, due to reduction in the
You
rate
think,
of,
your hypothesis is that APCO will reduce expenditures greater than revenues.
so that's the first point. The other point.
That is your hypothesis.
Well,
I think
we're, I
That
guess,
redistricting and APCO will reduce expenditures more than it reduces revenue.
no, the first point is that APFO, that growth mitigation will, the impact of that is that even though revenue is decreasing, expenditure is decreasing as well, and the net effect would be positive. It's perhaps, it could be viewed as a hypothesis, although we've been living that regulatory environment for 20 years, so, there's, we can point to actual real life to say that's what happened. But the other point is, if the claim is that APFO will reduce development, will reduce revenue due to reduction in development, we could also say redistricting will open a lot of these areas for new development.
It could also close it.
It
I mean,
could also close them.
there's no guarantee that it will open or necessarily close, right? So why would you, by your standards, you would then be making a half-true statement. Would you not then have to complete that and say, well, it might also open it?
That's
You know,
fair.
or it might also
The
close.
county-
So, I mean,
That's fair, so perhaps we could say,
We don't know what the impact of redistricting will be.
exactly, so, okay, so if that's what if we should follow that standard, then I think what I'm suggesting is that we should caveat a lot of these statements about the impact of APFO and these other legislative actions the same way as well.
All right,
So-
we'll look at that and see if we can craft some language that takes care of that.
I don't know if that makes sense.
It did. Anything else?
It would be helpful to, because in the report and in the presentations, we've seen comparisons of the county's school surcharge fees, the county's other metrics like recordation tax or income tax. We've compared them with other counties. It would be worthwhile to compare the school surcharge fees that the county has charged over the years with other counties.
It's already been changed, we don't need to look at that anymore, they've already changed the school
They already
surcharge
changed
fees.
it.
We look at that stuff because we're just trying to give a balancing act of where taxes are to give information, but they just changed the surcharge.
So you're back to your point of criticizing where the county has been, when the mission of the committee is to suggest spending and revenue and debt for the future.
I
We're
guess,
trying to say, try to maintain expenditure control, borrow less, and prepare for the future. That's all this report says.
I wholeheartedly agree with that part. The part that I'm concerned about is that,
Well, we can, I think if we caveat which you said, we come up with the language to caveat around the APCO development, that there could be potential expenditure controls or something like that to help balance that out, although I think just based on basic math that the two won't work and it'll be a reduction in revenue, but we can come up with something. I think we answer most of the comments that you have in your statement here.
Right, so the part that I'm, with respect to the surcharge fees, the part that I'm referring to is, since it's true that we're looking at the future, but to the extent that we've looked at
I think
impact
that's
from
right. Your
past
argument-
actions,
Yeah, that the
it would-
500 million would have been covered if we'd had a higher surcharge fee?
I think it's a contributing factor, and if we're gonna learn from our past actions, to the extent that we've included past actions as a contributing factor to where we are, we perhaps are not doing, we're doing a disservice by not including, significant sources of revenue that have been ignored, because one of the recommendations
But
is.
the argument there is that we would have known 20 years ago that surcharge fees should have been this particular number, which then would have covered the $500 million.
We have a motion, we can take a vote and put this correct.
Right, does anybody else in the committee want to put something about that in there? Do we have another motion? We have a motion, is there a second?
Second.
You're seconding his motion to add it in
I
there?
thought it was.
No.
No, his is the
You
motion.
can second it, we'll just have a vote on it.
Okay. All in favor? All opposed? Okay. Anything else?
Yeah. I saw some discussion that sort of presented the, I guess.
Where are you pointing to? I need to see it so I can process it, that's all, so.
Sure. So that must be a different page, right? Okay. Let's go to page, what's this?
I think we've covered everything in your key issues document.
This is relative, so this is related to, yeah, right here, page 5, yeah. Prioritize balance and service needs.
Page 5, top of page
Tough,
5.
I got, thank you.
Yeah. It concerns me that this discussion of the needs faced by retirees is juxtaposed with the discussion with school enrollment and, if you look at what was presented by the Department of Community
Where in the
Resource
report are you
Services.
talking about?
He's on
Page 5.
Here, I'll read the section, Richard. With the limited growth in revenues, the county must evaluate, prioritize, and realistically address the various service needs. Education has been and should remain the top priority for the county. However, as the county prioritizes education, it must not compromise other services needed by the community. For example, the county's 65-plus population has grown 3 to 4 times faster than student enrollment and total population growth respectively, and is expected to double in the next 2 decades. After all, this county is a full-service jurisdiction and must provide resources to households without students, services to those in need, and public safety, police, fire, emergency medical services for everyone in the community. Actually, I think this particular section comes in the heels of the whole full-service, same-service dialogue that we had at the last meeting. And it's a statement of fact.
Well, the part
Does
where,
anybody on the committee have an issue with this particular section?
No, because you're using this as just one example, referring to the 65 plus.
Says, yeah, it says for
We're not
example.
trying to cover every example.
Yeah. Is there anybody else on the committee have an issue with this section? Okay. Any other issues?
page 22.
What's the name of
The
this?
last page,
Last page.
residential permits issued.
So in the in the presentation, this was actually, it was stated that the reason there was a decline in permits was due to the cyclical nature of apartment permits. And whereas in this particular discussion, it was, again, trying to thread this narrative about the impact of
That's inflammatory language. We've
I-
already
I-
talked about the fact that we don't believe that there's a narrative. You're the one who believes there's a narrative, the rest of the committee, and then you say that again. I'm sorry, maybe I'm reacting to the fact that, of how you've portrayed this committee publicly outside of this room when you've been a member of the committee, so I apologize for that. I
I
apologize
think
to you for that.
that that's fine. So again,
I tried.
I think he may have a point.
No, he does. His point's here. I just didn't like the fact that he says the whole threading the narrative. That's what I have. But I agree with you. The number here is down because of multifamily. If you look at the others, the numbers aren't significantly
What
down.
was done with the pre-permitting steps.
Yep.
So we can clarify that point.
I think we can just delete this.
well, I
What
mean,
is the point?
The point, in 2019, permits fell because multi-unit fell.
okay.
So a lot of multi-unit stuff was for downtown Columbia permitted 2-3 years ago.
Right.
As a result, not that many buildings were permitted this year. So when you look at single-family housing permits, they're about the same, a little bit less, a little bit more, I don't remember, but it was a big drop in multi-unit. So one apartment building has, a couple, 50 to 100 apartments. So they weren't being, a bunch of them were permitted in the past, less were permitted in 2019, so the total number of unit permits went down.
We should also delete the second half of that first sentence of that paragraph, which says which was potentially impacted by recent legislation. Just
Let's
delete
just
that
take out
out.
that part.
What are we taking?
The second half of that sentence after 2019,
Okay.
which was potentially impacted by recent legislation. That
That's
doesn't
fine,
need to
just
be in
stick
there.
with it.
Anything else?
So that sentence is, that last half of that sentence is going, but then the other piece is what are we changing? The other, that you're talking about?
No, I think Dr. Clinch was just clarifying that section talks about pre-submission.
Oh, okay, so it's not.
It's not about, it's just saying that it's a statement. There are less things in the hopper.
Okay, but then, okay, got it.
Just one more thing.
Sure.
In other recommendations, this is on page 8, the last paragraph.
And the general plan?
On the general plan, the last paragraph. So in this particular section, the demand for housing, it's stated that the demand for housing will not be waning over the years, whereas in other parts of the report, it's being hypothesized or projected that there will be a decline in growth, in population growth in the county due to a decline in development.
You could say both things and be accurate.
Yes.
So demand.
You can demand,
Just because there's less there, less supply, there's still more demand.
You have a buyer's market when people
Mm.
want things that you don't
And this is gonna be a
have
seller's
many
market.
of.
So then, is the logic there that, if the demand is not, if the demand is not decreasing, would that be because there will still be people here continuing to need housing?
At no point did the population curve downward. If the population decreases, if the population increase flattens but does not curve downward, and we still don't have growth in homes to meet even that increase, there's still demand growth.
That's all it's saying, is that the demand for housing is still gonna be great. It's not saying that
People still want to be.
we're gonna build less, so therefore it's gonna grow. No, it's saying we're gonna continue to grow. I think we all agree that that's gonna happen in this community. There's a lot of great amenities here. People wanna be here. And it's just saying that the demand for housing is not gonna decline. So if there are two statements that can go together, they don't go separate from each other. Two different demands, maybe. Anything else from the committee? Okay, well, we'll make these changes. We'll get the report back out in the next few days, and we'll have a conference call next week to vote on the report. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your feedback and your suggestions. Thanks, Lynn, for the notes.